Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, Stories from the 78. This, I feel like, can just be a story for any music lover all over the world, really. I have my friend Peter here, and Peter, you've had a wonderful career. So how are you? How you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks. And you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to talk to with you. You were manager for the Replacements. You helped out with bands like R.E.M, discovering all sorts of bands like the Jayhawks and Suburbs, Soul Asylum, so on and so forth. Lots of bands that you helped find in Minneapolis. Then you made your way out to Los Angeles, worked with a whole other set of musicians, and now you kind of got it all in this new book that you put together called Euphoric Recall. So I imagine it was hard to get it all in one book.
You know, it was. I, I didn't pay too much attention to the contract and the word count I was supposed to be shooting for. And when I turned in the manuscript a year ago, right about now, I had 163,000 words. And they kind of laughed and said, well, we're glad you have so much to say, but you need to cut this in half because the contract was for 75,000 words. And what? So anyway, I just had to pay attention. I'm a novice, first time long form writer, so I apologized and I knocked it down as best I could. I think the final count when we were all done with the editing was somewhere around 87,000 words. But yeah, I do feel like it was a little. It could have been a little bit longer. I feel like we're missing some things in certain areas, but they also, there's a practical aspect to this stuff that I wasn't really aware of. One that they say the general reader doesn't like long books. They don't sell as well. And also longer books are more costly to publish. And that means the list price goes up. And also just the plain fact that I'm dealing with an editor at a small publisher who has other books to edit. And he just didn't
Sure.
have the bandwidth to edit a book that large. So that was, that's just the way it went. And I think it's good for what it is, but I wish it was a little bit longer.
Well, you know what? I'm guessing you probably will have the chance to either put out another book or make a part two of this one. But either way, I feel like being in the music industry or entertainment industry for that matter, for as long as you have in your story career of bands you've worked with, I mean, there's an endless supply of information you can put into a book, I'm guessing.
It's true. And you got to edit it, you got to cut it down to some kind of reasonable size. So I understand the practicality of it as well.
So, Midwestern boy at heart, you started off in Minneapolis, correct?
Correct. And I was there. Yeah,
Records.
I moved to Los Angeles in 1995. So been here a good long while, 28 years, I guess. But as I like to say, I didn't move away from Minneapolis. I love it there, but I moved to Los Angeles both for work and for a girl. And
Oh,
we're
well, sure.
married and have a kid, and everything's good in that department too. So
Well, there you go. Worked out in the end. It sounds like for both ends of it, the girl and the career. But talk about those formative days, just because the book reflects a lot of this. But I always like to talk in terms of like maybe a kid who's just kind of getting into this thing. I know it's way different than it was as far as like the trajectory of music. Now kids can do things on their laptops, but I'm a romantic at heart. I High Fidelity is a great movie and an also great book. Your career, and I don't mean this in any other way than just coincidence as I'm reading your book. A lot of those things are kind of, you worked at a record store, you DJ'd, you started a record company, and you founded some massive bands that have put a huge impact on the world. I mean, where do you start?
well, I mean, I guess I was just a music fan since I was a little kid. I had what I found to be a very strong reaction to music when I was quite young, and actually in the beginning, I found it a little spooky the way music hit me sometimes, and in particular, there was an Everly Brothers song I remember hearing when I was about 4 and a half, and it just did something to me that felt abnormal in a good way. And that song was called All I Have to Do Is Dream, came out in
Oh yeah.
1958. Whether or not I heard it right when it was fresh and newly released, I don't know, but somewhere around that time, I was born in 54, so probably sometime in the year of 1958, I heard that song. And it just really had a big impact on me, and music kept snowballing, I suppose, for the next few years. And as I grew older, and I also had a big brother who was really taken with the folk music boom of the late 50s and early 60s. So I heard lots of that stuff, everything from, the Chad Mitchell Trio to the Kingston Trio to Peter, Paul and Mary and Bob Dylan. And I liked all of that very much, as well as the pop records and the rock records that were on the top 40 radio at the time. But for me, it was really, really that, as happened with so many other people, it was January of 1964, first hearing the Beatles, that set me on the path. I heard that and I thought, somehow in my 9-year-old brain, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And once I saw them on the Sullivan Show in February, I was cooked. I mean, there was nothing else I wanted to do, and I've never done anything else, to be honest. So it's just been music all my life.
Yeah, I saw in the book there you have one of the photos is of your childhood room or in the basement,
Yeah.
where you're kind of similar to what's kind of going on behind you.
Yep, I've always had a room like this, and this is probably the biggest and best of all the rooms I've had. So we bought this house 23 years ago, and largely because of this room, we knew this is where we could put the music.
And in the photo as well, you mentioned the Beatles, and the Beatles, their historic appearance not only on Ed Sullivan and but also Shea Stadium. And in the book, there's a picture of R.E.M. at Shea Stadium, which I thought was pretty poetic in terms of what you just spoke about in that story.
Oh, it was that was quite an experience for me. I was quite overcome with emotion actually pulling into that place. I was road managing R.E.M. for a summer, the summer of 1983, and we did 7 stadium shows opening for the Police. And I remember driving into Shea Stadium that morning and just being a flutter, stomach in knots, my heart pounding. And at one point, when there wasn't a lot of activity on the stage, I actually walked out to the front and just stood there and looked out at whatever 67,000 empty seats and thought, how in the world did this kid from the Midwest end up here? And actually working a show at Shea Stadium, I actually went to found a payphone in one of the tunnels off the stadium there and called my mother and just told her where I was. And she had kind of scolded me off and on over the years for my obsession with music. But I think at that point she knew, what I was experiencing. And so she was quite moved by that experience as well. And R.E.M., I mean, they had never played any place that big at that time. And the way they handled the crowd, even with the rain as well, I mean, it was just, it was like they were born to do that.
You are such a Midwestern guy at heart. You called your mom and
I
told
did.
her where you were. I mean, that is, I'm from the Midwest myself. It's a very Midwest thing to do
I
because
guess.
we get overlooked, growing up, no matter where you're in the Midwest, it's always, what's going on in LA or going on in New York, and rightfully so, or London for that matter. But, when you're in the Midwest and you arrive, and that could be an arrival moment, you're doing a show at Shea Stadium, who do you want to tell? You want to tell your mom, of course.
That's right. That's right.
That's such a, yeah. Uh, how does a Midwestern kid do it though? I mean, you're talking about hundreds of, different record labels, independent, major, all different cities, Chicago in the Midwest, Cleveland, New York, LA, but Minneapolis, there was a special time there, and we can't forget to include Prince in that whole entire Minneapolis music scene right there, First Avenue exploding with all of this talent. Is that part of the mix that made the recipe that is your career?
It certainly is. And I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that Minneapolis, St. Paul has always been a big arts town. Not every major city supports the arts like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and from dance to fine art to poetry and music. I mean, it just was a great place, and it was encouraged and it was supported by local government, and it was amazing. So I think that my launch was really, I like you said, there aren't a lot of opportunities for music business work in a town the size of Minneapolis, at least back then. We had major label representatives who did promotion for, there was a Capitol Records guy and a Columbia Records guy and a Warner Brothers person and all that stuff. But I think for me, really getting started was essentially getting a job at a record store. And that record store ended up becoming a fairly influential place. We took a different path. I mean, it's also important to remember going back to this time in the early 70s, record stores were still run by businessmen. And in our town, we had the Musicland Corporation based there. So there were a lot of Musicland stores, and these places were run by adults and people who were keeping an eye on inventory that reflected the charts, as opposed to perhaps more artistic left of center records. And so when, you know, I guess the younger people started taking over the record stores, things changed, and that was one of the things that we did. I think one interesting fact I remember was that when the major labels generally avoided us because they thought we were a bunch of weirdos, but when they did actually cross our threshold, they'd bring in promotional things for, say, I don't know, probably, I don't know, Bon Jovi was around then, probably not in the early 70s. I'm trying to think of a applicable band then, but let's just say they brought in something that was a mainstream artist and wanted us to put them up in the windows. At Oar Folk, the record store I worked at, Oar Folkjokeopus, we were on a corner of 26th and Lyndale. We had a major one-way out one window and a major thoroughfare on the other side and on the other corner. So this real estate was important for visibility, and they bring in these posters of mainstream artists that they wanted us to put up, and we would say no, because if it was an artist we didn't endorse, we wouldn't put them in the windows, and that really pissed these guys off. They were
sticking to the man.
Exactly. And so anyway, we did it politely, of course, and just said, you know, we're sorry, we can't endorse this and we can't put them in our windows. And they'd storm out and say, you'll never get another promo from our record label again. And we'd say, well, okay, so be it. That's just the way we operate. So I think that, you know, so that's what happened record store wise. Also, in terms of my, you know, career, I guess I really thought that being a disc jockey was going to be my future. And I went to radio school, studied broadcasting and radio electronics, and did go to work in radio for about 15 months in 74, 75. But it was so restrictive, and I had people telling me what I had to play. The rock side of the station, it was a country on the AM side and rock on the FM side. And I was being told what to play by people that didn't really know all that much about music, and it really just kind of had to go by you know, it was a gold record format for one thing, so you couldn't play anything that was not certified gold. And I got into trouble once on that.
It gets boring really quick.
And yeah, and so I just thought, you know, radio's not for me, and unless I could land at a place where I was allowed to play, allowed to choose the music, or at least a large portion of the music that I was going to play. So, you know, radio, I tried it, didn't work. I fell back on the record store, which was just a fantastic job that I had for 10 years. And it really became like my college. And that's kind of where it started.
That, and then you started your own record company. You know, was it weird to do that after all these years of these big suits coming in telling you what music to play? You finally are like, here's what we're gonna do. This is our vision. This is my vision. This is what I want to do, and we're just gonna go forth and do it. Because you found some bands that all those record companies probably wish they found.
Well, you know, we started the label in 1977, so I was still full time at Oar Folk at the time, still managing the record store. But that was part of my appeal to the two other gentlemen who were partners of mine in starting this record label, because I had a real bird's eye view of the local scene, especially. And, you know, at that time, there were indie labels popping up all over the place. And of course, independent labels have been around, you know, really since the 50s. You think of things like Elektra Records or Folkways record. Folkways actually started earlier, but you know, there were independent labels of that nature coming along. You know, Atlantic Records was originally an indie. So by the early 70s, though, there was a new movement coming in where indie labels were popping up all over the place. And it was kind of inevitable Minnesota would join in that, you know, that happening. And I think that for us, really, we felt forced into existence by the number of great bands. I really feel like my two partners and I, you know, kind of looked around and said, nobody else is doing that. Maybe we should. And so we threw our hat in the ring and started Twin Tone Records.
And I imagine a lot of fun doing that in the record business, another, or the record store business, I should say. Another, I worked at a record store too at the tail end of, the record stores in the malls. I'm an 80s kid. I went to worked at Record Town, and worked there, but it was corporately owned. So a lot of the stuff you're talking about, like what is this crap we're putting out? Like, you know, why aren't we, it was before grunge was a thing, it was when I was in high school and they didn't want to touch it. And then all of a sudden that's all they wanted to do, right? So,
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
yes. And I worked in radio too for a little bit and realized that radio is just not what I hoped it would have been. When I've heard legendary stories from guys like Dick Biondi or John Records Landecker here in Chicago. But you went on to do other things, and you on the road with bands, managing other bands. What's like one of your most I would say proudest accomplishment with all of that? Do you have one? Or like is what was the most fun to write about in your book?
Well, I loved writing about all of it. I mean, I had some sort of tent poles, I guess. There was the record store and there was the club where a lot of the bands played, and I was a DJ. There was starting the record label. There was finding the replacements in particular in those early
Yeah.
days was a big deal. So, and then, eventually working with R.E.M. and going to California, coming here to California and working with some amazing artists like, Chris Christopherson or Dwight Yoakam or Steve Earle
Yeah.
and John Hyatt, for God's sakes. I mean, it was a wonderful time. But I think as far as a highlight, I would probably have to be something involved with the replacements, just because that was something that, I was lucky enough to be in a position to receive a demo tape from them. I guess the first demo tape they really gave out to anyone when they were a very young band and barely played live in public at that point. And I heard the tape. It had 4 songs on it, and it just absolutely electrified me. And so I guess I recognized greatness there before a lot of other people did, and I was so sure of it. I just knew it in my bones. And so I'm trying to think of one particular story about you. You mentioned the traveling business. I mean, I suppose there was a show in New York City at Irving Plaza in December of 1984 that came after a kind of a debacle of a show a week or so before at CBGB's, where the band they'd been on the cover of the Village Voice and had actually done an unannounced show at CBGB's because we had the big show at Irving Plaza a week later.
Mhm.
So the band played under a fake name, a pseudonym. They called themselves Gary and the Boners, but they had just been on the cover of the Village Voice, and so word got around that this was actually the Replacements, and it wasn't such a secret name because it was the name of a song on a Replacements record. So I think a lot of people got tipped off just by that. But word spread, and CBGB's was packed to the gills. And Alex Chilton opened up, who was a great hero of mine and the Replacements.
Yeah, they
And
have
so
a song.
everybody got a little excited, maybe had a couple extra cocktails. And so when the Replacements went on, it was pretty messy. And I saw them do some shows where they'd had a lot to drink that were really fun. This was not one of them. They were just plain bad, I thought. And so I think the next week when they played this show at Irving Plaza, it was packed, I think close to sold out. And maybe they had something to prove. And so they walked on stage and they just burned the joint down. I mean, it was just fantastic from song one. And I think that moment, I watched them walk on stage and kick into the first song, and I watched people's faces. It was like the guy in the Max L ad sitting in the chair with his hair blowing back. I mean, people were really blown away. And towards the end of the show, I remember walking around the room just to take it all in. And I saw our lawyer talking to a gentleman who was wearing a suit jacket. He was looked very excited, a lot of hand gestures and whatnot. And I was like, I wonder what's going on over there. And when that man walked away, our lawyer walked over to me and he said that was Seymour Stein from Sire Records. And he just said he's going to have you guys signed before you even get home from this tour. That was, if you want to highlight, that might be it.
Yeah, I mean, you just described every dream that every kid was striving for in the music business. The great show after people saying that you might not be great, or like, what was that? And you come out and you slay a show from start to finish and get signed
Yeah,
in that one. I mean, that is kind of a dream come true scenario.
it was. It took them 4 records to get to the major label, which I was constantly amazed by. I thought the first record was great, nobody knocking. Second record was great, nobody knocking. So anyway, it took 4 records, and their fourth album, Let It Be, was definitely. In fact, I still think that's the best album they ever made. So by that time, it was pretty undeniable, and the major labels had to step in, and we had interest from others. EMI was knocking, Columbia, inquired. We even had a meeting with Bob Biggs out here in Los Angeles about Slash Records. So there were other people interested, but Seymour Stein was the one that actually made it happen, and of course, one of the great record guys of all time. So to be signed by him was a great feather in their cap.
Yeah, I imagine somebody at some point said, "You should put this in your book," and here we are.
That's right.
It's funny. We were just talking about the record store business, and I imagine you are excited or just proud of the fact that the record stores have popped back up again. Independent record stores are, at least here in Chicago and other bigger cities I've been in, they're back. They're everywhere, popping up, and I even have a record store release by the Replacements on just like a small vinyl. But it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, I have to own that. I don't care. Like, I need to own it. But I imagine it's got to be kind of fun to see come almost full circle and at the importance of record stores.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think for me, vinyl is still the best sounding format. Um, and So it's exciting to have the stores back. I mean, I also, living in Los Angeles, we have a million great record stores out here. So we were never lacking, from, the giant Amoeba records in Hollywood to Freak Beat records over in Sherman Oaks, or, fill in the blank. I mean, there's just stores everywhere here. And Minneapolis always had good record stores too. But yeah, there was a lull, and when physical sales really dropped out of the ball game in the early 2000s, it was hard to keep those little record stores in business. But yeah, it has turned around, and of course I'm delighted to see it. And a lot of these book events, we're doing book events for this book that I've written, and I think I've done 6 or 7 now, and only one of them has been in a bookstore here in LA. Seattle and Portland, we did record stores. I just did 2 record stores in Minneapolis. We're going to the East Coast in a couple of weeks to do New York and Philadelphia and Providence, and those are all at record stores except Providence, which is going to be kind of a thing in a cool place called it's called POP, Museum of Popular Culture. So
Very cool.
So anyway, yeah, it's great to have record stores being more of a reality again these days, and because they're really like community centers. They're places where people can go to get information about music, where what the best new, not only what the best new records are, but where the good bands are playing around town that week, for instance, or just chit chat about old records, new records, and everything in between.
Absolutely. Chicago's blessed to have them too. I mean, legendary places like Rolling Stone Records, and we have Reckless Records here. I mean, it's a plethora, and I can talk to you about music all day long. I don't want to bore you with all my questions all day, but people, or before I get to the last part, I'm curious, as a person who's been in the music business for a long time and has been successful, and you've had your ups and downs, and you talk about that in your book, but what do you classify, or what would you say the music industry or the music business now? Because I've had this conversation about music, with a lot of people, where people say music's not the way it used to be. Music has changed so much because, you can do it on a laptop, you can do it on this. People blame technology for maybe the soul of music disappearing a little bit. I'm curious, as a person who's been in the music business from the record store days at their heyday, all the way through now where it's back and everything in between, where do you see the music business today? Is there things lacking?
Well, I think to say the soul of music has disappeared is nonsense. I mean, I think, there's more music available to more people now than ever before. How can that not be a good thing in a number of ways?
Sure.
And it comes with its issues. I think the problem with the music industry right now is and my son is now 21, almost 22. He's working in the music industry out here, and he's doing some great work. He's learning a whole lot, and he's got a great ear. But a lot of what he does is looking at statistics, and things are based on the numbers of hits on Spotify, or
Huh?
number of plays on Spotify, or
Algorithms.
yeah, it's algorithms and statistics, and I think that's what hurts a little bit, because also because the payment is so grossly unfair. A young artist, with so much of the world going to streaming, they're not paid in the same way that they would be paid if they were selling their own physical product, whether it be 7-inch 45s, full-length LPs, or even CDs, or downloads for that matter. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to lose a lot of artists that may have been great songwriters, because it's almost impossible to make a living doing it these days. And one of the things that I've said over the years, when somebody asks me for advice about, I want to start a record label, or I've got a band, and I really want to make a go of it, I say one of the things that you got to do before you take step one is that you've got to accept the fact that 90% of the musicians in the world can't make a living playing music. And if you can't help it, and then that's what you have to do, then you've got to dive in head first, and you've got to play. I think that, as you said, with the home recording gear, there's a whole lot of people that spend all their time, or an inordinate amount of time, recording and writing the music, and maybe not enough time becoming a great live performer. And that's you've got to have both to make a go of it. I think you can't sell records if you're sitting at home recording all the time. And so that's also a problem. And I understand how hard it is to get on the road and to play when you're starting out. Believe me, I've been through it with many artists. And but you have to figure out a way to do it. And the bottom line is that some artists figure out a way to put one foot forward, one foot after another forward, and to make a go of it. And not everybody can do it. So you've got to be thick-skinned. You've got to weather the music business, which can be really an unforgiving place a whole lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I read Dave Grohl's biography. He talked to early days about sleeping on floors in warehouses in Germany while they're performing in January,
Yeah.
just to, make enough money to eat the next day. And he did it for years, before he was Dave Grohl from Nirvana, and then so on and so forth afterwards. I think that's a good example. I think people look at bands like the Foo Fighters, or Taylor Swift for that matter, and they say, well, it's just so easy for them. It's like, no, that's just what the world makes it look like. But none of it was easy for any of these people.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, hard work pays off for sure. And your hard work has got you this book. And before I let you go, what are you listening to right now? Like, what do you recommend for folks, heading into the holiday season here?
Well, I probably my favorite thing right at the moment is an LA-based band called Gold Star, and their records aren't in circulation nationally or internationally for that matter. But they've got 4 albums that are available on Bandcamp, 4 albums and an EP, and I think they're phenomenal. That's one band I'd really recommend. I'm crazy about a British folk group called the Unthanks. I think they're one of the best performing groups in the world. And performing and recording. It's 2 sisters. Actually, oddly enough, their last name is actually Unthank, Rachel
Huh.
and Becky Unthank, and they have a great band behind them. But it's some of the most beautiful harmony singing I've ever heard in a folk music tradition. But they're very much they push the envelope a whole lot, covering crazy ideas like they do a King Crimson song, or they do a Robert Wyatt song, or it's so they're very interesting. I like what else? What else would be a great one? Boy Genius. I think are
Oh
a
yeah.
fantastic band. I'm particularly fond of Phoebe Bridgers' music. I wish she'd make more albums of her own because I think she's one of the best artists in the world these days. So those are a couple of things that I'm listening to.
Peter, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me and just talk about your career. It's wonderful to talk to somebody who loves music as much as I love. You probably love it more, but either way, I love music. When you talked about how it affects you in a way that it's hard to explain, I completely can sympathize with that because people like I hear a song and then if it takes me somewhere that I can't help, some are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I just love this song and I haven't heard it in a while. And it's when
Yep.
it's like hearing it for the first time every single time because it's so good. So I love that aspect of music and what it can do and bring people together. Where can people buy your book?
I think it's available in most bookstores, the Barnes and Nobles, and hopefully the local booksellers in different towns, and certainly through Amazon.com. And I think a lot of record stores are carrying it as well. So, and I want to throw that back at you. Thank you for asking. It's an honor to be on your podcast. You run a great one, and your reputation precedes you. So, thank you very much, Tom, for inviting me on.
Absolutely. And you know what? If you come to Chicago and you sign at a record store here, we'll meet in person, if not
That's
sooner.
fantastic. In fact, I'm thinking about Chicago. We got some thoughts about over the in the new year of doing Chicago and Nashville and Memphis. So might be down there, and I'd love to meet you in person.
Yeah, yeah. Remember, don't forget about those Midwestern guys.
I will not.
All right. Have yourself a great Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to you and to your family. And thanks again.
Thank you, Tom.